A Great Argead Saga Alexein, Alexander the Great. Volume 1, Telesias, The War Dance. By Macaulay. A new episode every single day. Episode 12-2, Macedonia, Ekphora, Funeral Procession Part 2. The dust of the road from Pella rose in a thick, choking column, hanging over the procession like a shroud. While the low-born mourning women wailed on foot, tearing at their hair in the dirt, the individual factions operating under the first-day funeral truce began tightening their ropes. Riding nearest to the regent was Antipater. Already a man of formidable gravitas and unyielding devotion to the state, he held his horse steady, his weathered face carved from ancient Macedonian granite. He did not look at Ptolemy, nor did he look at the boys. His eyes were fixed entirely on the road ahead. Let Ptolemy play the conqueror on horseback, Antipater calculated silently, his hand adjusting the reins with mechanical precision. Let Eurydice weep inside her curtained cage. Sovereigns are transient variables. The soil and the supply lines are the only constants. To Antipater, the theatrical posturing of the usurper was a noisy distraction from the true catastrophe. While the court paraded its manufactured grief under the blistering summer heat, his mind operated as a cold, tireless ledger. He spent this opening day of the march finalizing his invisible administrative grid, mapping out every storage depot, every salt house, and every strategic crossroad between Pella and the sacred perimeter of Igi. A subtle nod from a dust-covered rider on the shoulder of the road gave him the final variable he required. The confirmation was quiet, verified through a series of encrypted signs. The vital Axios river barges had been successfully secured by his personal agents. If Pelopidas breaches the southern passes, or if Perdiccas descends from the high foothills, the army will panic, he reasoned, his inner monologue steady and detached from the mounting tension. But an army that can eat will hold its ground. If the kingdom fractures tomorrow under a multi-front firestorm, the core valley must not collapse into a wartime famine. I will lock down the grain pipelines under my own authority. Let them fight over the diadem. I will control the bread that feeds the men who wear it. With the Axios barges secure and the mountain silos quietly accounted for under his personal ledger, Antipater maintained his rigid, silent vigil. His presence beside the regent carried the heavy, warning weight of an elder statesman who had already survived 3 kings and knew precisely how much blood it took to wash a throne clean. Just behind him, General Parmenion, a man engineered from clinical severity, maintained an unreadable mathematical mask across his features, monitoring the princes from his horse with detached precision. 3 fronts. For if the eastern coastal plain defaults before sunrise, Parmenion's inner mind calculated, completely detached from the cloying sweetness of the incense drifting back from the hearse. Ptolemy preaches about destiny and leverage, but destiny means nothing if the vanguard's left flank is enveloped by Illyrian shields. Forced by protocol to ride somberly near the king's bier during the daylight hours, Parmenion operated on a brutal, sleepless double shift. To the weeping court and the marching levies, he was a silent, unblinking sentinel of the old military establishment. But beneath his heavy woolen mourning cloak, his thighs were already raw from the saddle, and his mind was a hyper-focused battle map. Let them parade the corpse at a toddler's pace, he reasoned coldly, his eyes tracking the dust clouds kicked up by the column. Every league we crawl south toward Igi is a league we concede to Perdiccas in the western gaps. The barbarian does not honor a funeral truce. The moment the column would halt for the first night of camp, Parmenion was prepared to disappear into the twilight. While the court slept under the protection of the sacred customs, he would slip back into the saddle, riding hard into the jagged, pitch-black valleys of the western passes to meet his hidden vanguard cells. He was playing a lethal, microscopic game of chess against Perdiccas' advance scouts, deliberately trading isolated ridges and minor patches of high ground for a handful of precious hours. I cannot stop the infantry squares with a fractured lowland army, he thought, his jaw setting as he measured the physical stride of the young princes below him. But I can bleed their scouts. I can choke their supply trails. I can buy Pella 3 more sunrises. If the boy Perdiccas is to keep his head long enough to wear the crown, I must hold the gates of the mountains with nothing but dust and ghosts. Beside Parmenion rode the more volatile young Attalus, his right hand never drifting more than a micro-inch from the gold leaf hilt of his broadsword. Let Ptolemy borrow from the merchants and beg at the gates of Athens, Attalus sneered in the silent vault of his chest, his eyes tracking the light glinting off the regent's polished armor. A kingdom isn't built on ledgers and parchment. It belongs to the clan that can bleed its enemies into submission. Ptolemy is an administrative parasite dressed in a warrior's cloak. Operating on the direct periphery of the march, he used his elite lowland foot retainers to maintain an aggressive, suffocating security presence over the traveling court. His men marched with shields deliberately unlocked, their iron-shod spear butts slamming into the dry earth with a heavy, rhythmic cadence that felt less like a funeral guard and more like an occupying army. Throughout the afternoon, he intentionally snubbed Ptolemy's direct heralds, looking right through them as if they were ghosts, while pulling younger, impressionable aristocratic bloodlines into his writing circle. He was systematically planting a toxic, irresistible seed among the hot-blooded sons of the nobility. The Regent's dependency on southern gold isn't statecraft. It's a rope around our necks. The moment his credit runs dry, the southern phalanxes will burn Pella to the ground, and we will be the ones left paying the bill in blood. General Parmenion, Ptolemy called out, the tone of the usurper saturated with an arrogant certainty. Does the army track the form of a sovereign executing an authentic mourning? Or do they decode the fragile posture of a child who lacks the marrow to rule? Parmenion opened his mouth, his mind entirely detached from the political baiting, his strategist's voice sounding like the grinding of heavy gravel. The army observes the funeral itself, Regent. Their intellect is anchored exclusively to a solitary variable, namely, who will possess the absolute muscle to lead them back to Pella when this ritual expires. Attalus let loose a sharp cackle, a raw, abrasive sound that cut through the cloying haze of dust and incense. Look at the old man, still trying to straddle the fence while the world burns, Attalus thought, his lip curling with open disdain for Parmenion's careful diplomacy. He leaned forward over his horse's neck, intentionally letting his scabbard strike hard against his stirrup iron. They decode an absolute vacancy, Regent Ptolemy. Attalus mocked openly, his voice ringing across the ranks of the walking lords. And every man on this road knows that your bulk has already occupied the space behind that throne. The only question left is whether you intend to buy our loyalty with foreign coin, or if you have the stomach to take it by the edge of a blade. Philip completely ignored the taunts of the regent on the volatile bluster of Attalus, casting his gaze past the sweating horses, toward the jagged, broken horizon line defined by the Vermian Mountains. They are fighting over a corpse's shadow while the walls are collapsing. The 14-year-old prince analyzed, his internal pulse cold, rhythmic, and entirely devoid of fear. Attalus wants a blood feud and Ptolemy wants a banking contract. Neither of them can see past the dust of their own horses. His intellect was already processing a far more dangerous calculus. Across the crest of those jagged peaks, Bartolus and his Illyrian hordes had undoubtedly received the dispatch regarding the king killing. The massive, miles-long clouds of dust rising from the slow-moving Ekphora were a perfect geostrategic beacon to every wolf encircling the frontier, a clear mathematical confirmation that the old king was rotting in the dirt. The treasury was empty, and the realm now lay exposed, waiting for the hand sharp enough to tear it away from the amateurs on horseback. Philip's fingers twitched inside his gray tunic, his fingertips pressing against the hard wood of his secret cipher baton. Let them talk, he resolved. The more space they occupy with their noise, the less they will see me coming. Behind the princes, the formal royal carriage of the Queen Mother jolted violently against the rocky mountain pass, its iron-rimmed wheels grinding against limestone like teeth. Inside the cabin, hidden deep within the sealed, dark linen curtains of her closed chariot, the air was suffocating. Queen Mother Eurydice sat wrapped in an absolute, terrifying silence. She barely heard the outside clatter or the anxious pacing of the retinue. Her mind was a racing clinical battlefield, mapping out a multi-layered defense to save her last son, her truest hope for the dynasty. Philip. Ptolemy thinks he has partitioned the board, Eurydice calculated fiercely, her unblinking gaze fixed on the passing gray cliffs. But he underestimates a mother's reach. Using the fluid movement of the morning crowd, she spent this first day slipping desperate handwritten mandates through the slits of her curtains directly to Antipater's agents. She had already set the gears in motion before the first torch was lit for the march. Her mind retraced the secret letters she had smuggled out of Pella. The first had gone to Athens, to an influential general who had once sworn an oath to her late husband, King Amyntas III. From Athens, a second, more critical missive was already speeding toward the mighty city-state of Thebes. It was addressed to the brilliant, terrifying General Epaminondas and to his ferocious brother-in-arms, General Pelopidas, who was currently campaigning just south in Thessaly with a veteran phalanx. Her plea was simple. Summon Pelopidas to march up to Pella immediately to stabilize the Argead court. It was a devastatingly high-stakes gamble. She was prepared to offer Philip up as a royal hostage, handing her youngest son over to the custody of the Thebans to buy a peace treaty that would secure Macedonia's borders from the predatory barbarian nations circling them. It must succeed, she told herself, her jaw tightening until it ached. Pelopidas saved our royal house once before, right after Alexander was crowned. Thebes restored order then. They will do it again. Yet, a cold, sickening drop of doubt fouled her stomach. But what if they flip the coin? What if the hegemon decides a broken Macedonia suits them better than a stable one? If the deal with the Theban generals crumbled, Ptolemy would waste no time. He would move to eliminate Philip the moment foreign protection was off the table. Eurydice's chest tightened. She needed a secondary escape route, a blood shield. If the south failed her, she would send Philip north into the wild, cloud-shrouded highlands to his maternal uncle Eurydice, Lord of Lyncestus. Eurydice was a formidable, ruthless warlord who commanded thousands of hardened hill tribesmen. Both Perdiccas and Philip carried the fierce Lyncestian bloodline through her own veins. Eurydice was no fool. He watched the lowland court of Pella like a hawk mapping the movements of field mice. He knew that if Ptolemy successfully assassinated young Perdiccas, perhaps by sending him to an accidental death on the Illyrian frontier, Philip would be the next throat to be slit. Eurydice would fight to protect his blood, if only to keep a Lyncestian claim on the Argead throne. She had already dispatched a rider to the mountain lord before they left the palace gates. Eurydice finally looked up, her dark eyes shifting toward the window, catching sight of Philip's sharp, observant figure walking in the dust below. He wasn't weeping like his brother. He was watching the horizon, tracking the subtle movements of the guards with an analytical maturity that terrified and thrilled her. She closed her eyes, a dark, protective mania flaring in her chest. Far ahead, standing on the ancient stone ramparts of Aegae, old General Attalus spent the day fortifying the ancestral tombs. He treated the arrival of Ptolemy's advance scouts with rigid, insulting minimalist formality, deploying his heavily armed veterans to lock down every narrow entrance to ensure that if the Regent attempted a surprise purge within the Sacred Valley, it would turn into an immediate bloodbath. Let Ptolemy play the Regent. Let him think he has inherited a kingdom. He has only inherited a tomb. Beyond the Valley of Mourning, the rest of the world refused to weep. In the south, Alexander of Pherae capitalized on the vacuum with vicious precision. Let the Argead bastards choke on their own incense, the tyrant sneered, his fingers tracing the cold iron pommel of his short sword as he watched his mercenaries break down the gates of a Larissaean estate. Alexander II thought he could play the imperial master. He thought placing his pathetic garrisons in my cities would bind Thessaly to Pella forever. Now he is rotting in a box, his army is frozen by a priest's decree, and the aristocrats who begged for his protection are left without a shield. I will reclaim my board by nightfall. With the traditional Macedonian garrisons completely isolated inside their fortresses, paralyzed by the first-day funeral customs, and legally unable to march to their allies' defense, the tyrant unleashed a savage, calculated domestic offensive across the plains of Thessaly. He spent this single day hunting down, disarming, and systematically slaughtering the pro-Macedonian noble factions. His primary targets were the ancient wealthy houses of the Eurydice of Larissa, the very elites who had invited the Argead infantry south just a year prior. Alexander of Pherae's execution squads moved through the noble quarters like a plague, dragging patricians into the streets to clear his own domestic board of foreign rot before the lowland court could recover. Ptolemy thinks he can maintain his leverage over the south through paper treaties, the tyrant reasoned coldly, stepping over the fresh blood pooling on the limestone courtyard. He doesn't have the marrow to defend his own capital, let alone the Tagus of Thessaly. By the time they bury that boy king at Aegae, there won't be a single voice left alive in Larissa to whisper the name of Macedon. It was a masterclass in swift geopolitical decapitation. By erasing the Eurydice lineage in a single afternoon of slaughter, the tyrant was effectively severing Pella's southern arm, ensuring that when the multi-front firestorm finally broke across the borders, the Argead house would find nothing but an armed wall of Thessalian blades waiting for them in the south. Even within the procession itself, the fracture lines were visible. The proud mountain cavalry barons of the Lyncestians and Elymiates rode in tight, armed circles on the very periphery of the march, their stallions tossing their heads against the bit as if smelling the rot at the center of the column. Let the lowlanders drag their dead idols through the dust. Lord Aripus of Lyncestis calculated silently, his hand resting with cold indifference on his horse's armored crest. His eyes drifted over the walking princes, dismissive and clinical. They trade the crown like a piece of meat in a Pella market, but they forget that the mountains hold the keys to their survival. When the lowlands burn, the crags will remain standing. Beside him, General Leonidas of the Elymiate horsemen adjusted his heavy cloak, his gaze locked on Ptolemy's rigid back. The regent's gold lines are thin, Leonidas reasoned, his internal monologue pacing with the rhythmic thud of his squadron's hooves. He promises us stability, but he borrows his authority from Athens. If the southern phalanxes are the Illyrian squares breach the valley, Ptolemy will use our bodies to plug the gap. We owe nothing to usurper who rules by proxy. Their faces were masks of cold, detached arrogance, completely divorced from the theatrical mourning of the court. They used the slow, agonizing cadence of this first day to hold quiet councils on horseback, their whispers shielded by the heavy clatter of their specialized mountain cavalry gear. Moving along the margins like armored hawks, they quietly confirmed their private alliances with Ptolemy's wealthy financial backers, not out of loyalty to the regent, but to secure their own positions. They were mapping out a brutal secondary strategy. The exact moment the state collapsed into anarchy, under the multi-front firestorm, they would withdraw their forces from the valley entirely. They would seal the critical, high-altitude mountain passes against the lowland corps, leaving Pella to be devoured by its enemies, while the upper country kingdoms locked their gates and watched the lowlands drown in their own blood. To be continued in episode 13, Watcher in the Dark. Watch and listen now. Watch the cinematic video trailer. Listen to the full saga now. Bookmark Volume 1, Telesias playlist. Bookmark Volume 1, Divine Oracle playlist. Join the Vanguard. A new episode drops every single day until the epic conclusion of Volume 1. Each chapter delivers a tight, hyper-focused 5 to 15-minute hit of cinematic historical drama, perfect for your daily plunge into antiquity. Subscribe to follow the bloody rise of the Argead dynasty. Thumbs up to help push our vanguard through the algorithm's gauntlet. Comment below. The first day of the Ekphora has pushed the royal house to its physical limits while the borders completely disintegrate. With Eurydice playing the fragile flower, Eurydice plotting a dangerous deal with Thebes, and the mountain barons circling the periphery, who do you think holds the true tactical advantage before the procession reaches Igi? Drop your breakdowns below.